The richest and one of the most significant cities in the globe is New York City. With Wall Street, it serves as the financial and economic hub of the entire globe and is home to more than 10 million people. Nearly 200 billionaires and the most influential families in the world call this region home, and unparalleled wealth has been created here. But New York City is in decline for the first time in history. That's correct, there have been several disastrous issues over the past few years. The pandemic, digitalization, and the significant budgetary issues New York City is currently experiencing. This city has turned into one that is absurdly expensive, overrun with crime and poverty, and a terrible location for those seeking the American dream. Owning a home, a car, and a family here is a luxury reserved only for the wealthy due to exorbitant costs. All of these issues are causing New York to lose its status as the global financial hub, becoming a less significant and declining metropolis as a result. To give you an indication, New York experienced a population loss of nearly 400,000 people in the year 2021. While one might assume that this was primarily due to the losses brought on by the pandemic, other factors also played a role, being one of the reasons because of massive emigration. That's correct, for the first time in the city's history, nearly 1,000 people leave New York every day. In this video, we will examine the reasons why the emblem of opportunity and capitalism is coming to an end. One of the places most severely affected by the pandemic was New York City. In this graph you will see the size of the New York City economy as measured by its gross domestic product. As you will see in 2019, this figure was nearly $1.6 trillion. Just to give you a little perspective, $1.6 trillion is equivalent to the economies of Mexico and Peru combined. But as you'll see here, during the pandemic, the New York City economy plummeted 6%. This was the largest plunge ever seen in its history, far more than the 2008 recession's drop of less than 1%. This economic downturn during the pandemic was a disaster. Here's how the level of jobs went down. At the beginning of the pandemic, 1 in 3 workers had lost their jobs, and this figure is still not recovering. According to estimates, 1 in 10 employees still lack employment. Bankruptcies were the main factor in this labor market tumult. Due to the quarantine and widespread concern over contracting the virus, that wave of visitors and shoppers in New York vanished overnight. Here, the leisure and hospitality, transportation, as well as other professional services, were the sectors most impacted. Imagine that millions of people were suddenly made unemployed and forced to live in the most expensive metropolis in the world. Yes, New York presently ranks second to Singapore in terms of cost of living. Just as 2 instances, the typical monthly rent for a 1-bedroom apartment is close to $4,000. And if you don't have the money to reside downtown, the same apartment on the outskirts of the city would cost you almost $2,400 a month. Then, never mind purchase. In the heart of New York, the cost per square meter is close to $15,000, while on the edges of the city, it is close to $10,000. If you choose to go on a date with your partner, a typical meal for 2 in a regular restaurant would cost $100, not including alcohol and tips, as the average bottle of wine in New York City costs about $12. So picture how awful it would be if you were fired at the last minute. The ultra-rich and those with access to the famed telecommuting were the only groups to profit from this catastrophe. In this situation, those who could work remotely typically earned high salaries in the finance industry or other professions. However, one of the reasons New York fell was due to this very teleworking. Everything in New York altered as a result of digitization. Millions of people once immigrated to New York from all over the globe to live in the land of opportunity. It was necessary to reside in the city to commute to work in order to take advantage of those opportunities. However, New York City has lost its allure as a result of digitalization, which does not necessitate physical presence at work. In fact, New York City serves as both the global banking center and the nation's economic engine. There are individuals in this room who earn millions of dollars annually. After taxes, the typical wage in New York City is close to $6,000 per month. Remember that this is an estimate. Therefore, a professional earning $120,000 or more annually is very typical. And it is because of this wealth that New York is the most expensive metropolis in the world, with an average rent of almost $4,000 for a one-bedroom apartment. However, since digitalization has altered every aspect of the workplace, individuals can now make the same wage while working in a location that is much more affordable. And during the pandemic, that is precisely what took place. To live in a much cheaper, larger apartment close to nature, people preferred to relocate outside of New York to towns in the same state as or outside of the state. Here in this graph you will see which were the most popular destinations thanks to the pandemic and digitalization. As you will see, the vast majority preferred to leave the cold and go to Florida. Many others stayed within the New York area, but went to nearby states that were much cheaper. Just to give you an example, in the city of Tampa, Florida, a rent in the center of the city for one person is $2,000, which is almost half the price of New York. And if you want to buy an apartment, here you would pay almost $4,000, almost a quarter of what you would pay in New York. Then, regular and recreational costs in Florida are typically half as high as those in New York. Additionally, Florida offers pleasant weather and lush surroundings. In comparison to New York, this place makes the concept of starting a family and living the American dream much more attainable. If you are enjoying this video and want to be aware of new videos, subscribe to this channel and turn on notifications. Security was a side consequence of the pandemic that caused the mass emigration. As I already said, the pandemic sparked terrible terror throughout the city. People in New York City, one of the densest cities in the world where people live close to one another, were so scared of spreading disease that they refused to even live in buildings because they believed that the ventilation was a source of the disease. In addition, crime in New York increased dramatically during the pandemic. Although crime has been falling in New York over the past 2 decades, during the pandemic it skyrocketed thanks to the economic plight of the poorest. Therefore, this was yet another factor that led people to relocate outside of the metropolis. Taxes and the reality that New York City is insolvent, however, were the most recent factors that contributed to a significant emigration from the city. The most expensive taxation in the nation are in New York City. Yes, in the entire United States, even higher than California. As you'll see in this chart, while states like Texas and Florida charge almost half as much in taxes as New York. But that's at the state level. New York City imposes its own taxes, raising this level even higher. These include extra sales taxes, income taxes, and other local taxes. For example, a person earning $100,000 in New York City has to pay 31% more in taxes, putting $68,000 in his or her pocket. Whereas, in Florida you would pay 22% in taxes, which equals almost $10,000 more in after-tax income. Therefore, it is obvious that people who can work from home are leaving New York to live in Florida. And here the big question arises: why are taxes so high in New York City? It appears that both New York State and New York City are on the verge of declaring bankruptcy. That's right, New York State is one of the most indebted states in the entire country. Here in this chart you will see in light blue the size of its debt at the state level and in dark blue the debt at the city level. As you will see, the debt has been slowly rising and remained stable between the years 2013 through 2019. But when the pandemic hit, this debt skyrocketed to a never-before-seen record of nearly $400 billion. Just to give you an idea of the size of the debt, $400 billion is equivalent to the economy of Colombia. And thanks to the ongoing repercussions of the pandemic, the debt is predicted to continue rising for years to come, as you will see in the graph. So let's move back for a moment. The most expensive taxation in the nation are in New York City. Additionally, it has a huge deficit despite having the highest taxes in the nation. The main concern here is why the New York government needs to borrow money if its taxes are so expensive. To reduce the government debt, that is the justification. That's right, New York has been running a chronic deficit for years. Here in this chart you will see the size of the deficits New York has run in the past. As you will see, these are not small numbers, and according to the latest estimates it is going to have a deficit of over $6 billion thanks to the pandemic. Therefore, in order to pay this deficit, the New York government has to borrow money since it cannot pay with the astronomical taxes it already has. And so this deficit and debt is a very serious problem. They have to start cutting certain public benefits like schooling, healthcare, and infrastructure because they can't manage their finances well. And that explains why so many individuals are leaving the city as well. In other words, in addition to being the most expensive city in the entire globe, it also has the highest tax rates in the nation and a dysfunctional government. And the very wealthy and corporations were the first to abandon this city. These two groups are the ones who pay the most taxes to the city, and they can relocate to states with lower taxes and higher standards of living very easily. For instance, the previous president, a native New Yorker who now resides in Florida. But that is only one illustration. Many thousands of businesses and institutions have followed suit. Unless there are structural changes, it is very difficult to reverse this immigration tendency once it has begun. To attract businesses and individuals, for instance, taxes could be reduced. Infrastructure could also be improved to allow for the enjoyment of public benefits. But regrettably, this will not materialize. In addition, taxation are increasing rather than decreasing, and New York City is getting worse rather than better. If we look back at the history of the United States, we can see that the economic possibilities in New York were what drew so many immigrants from all over the world. The renowned Statue of Liberty was among the first views these immigrants encountered. A monument that represents chance, freedom, and advancement in American territory. And in New York City, people could obtain well-paying jobs, live comfortably, and take advantage of the infrastructure that society had to give. However, the epidemic exposed New York City's serious issues, and it was unable to survive. The city is currently experiencing a huge exodus of residents and companies that pay taxes to the city. Sadly, this marks the start of New York's demise. Although the process of change has already started and will take years to complete, New York's era of economic dominance is now in the past. That prompts me to question you, which cities do you believe will replace current economic powerhouses in the United States? Leave your thoughts in the comments. Thanks for watching the Money Street, and don't forget to click the subscribe button for more financial videos.